teaching staffs, the non-teaching staffs, and the students. I will not go to the details of the topic. I will just welcome you from the core of my heart, and then I shall ask and request Professor Mahila Basu to please do the needful works for the session. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. We are already live on YouTube. Please share the link which is being posted in the chat box. Certain things that I want to remind you, all the participants, the rules of the webinar in order to help us to continue with the webinar smoothly. Please mute your audio and switch off your video. Please do not mute the speaker. This is an earnest request from us. Please do not mute the speaker. Please fill up the feedback link which will be posted in the Google chat box at the end of the webinar. Please do not post questions asking when the feedback link will be posted. It will be posted in due time and you have to fill up the link in order to get your e-certificates which are auto-generated. You have to fill up the feedback form in order to get the e-certificates which are auto-generated. Somebody's audio is on and there is too much static. Please mute your audio. Thank you. Now I request Dr. Shumana Gupta, Head of the Department of English, BANIPUR MAHILA MAHAVIDYALAYA, to please take over the session.
Thank you, Professor Mahila Basu, our IQAC coordinator. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
I extend a very warm welcome to all the participants present here. And I think somebody is presenting. Please stop presenting, as our IQAC coordinator has already requested you. Please don't present. Now, I extend a very warm welcome to the distinguished speakers and to the participants present here. So, I would first like to introduce you to the topic, the title of the webinar, which is Rereading Three American Writers in the Times of Pandemic. And these three writers are Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and William Faulkner. So, the term rereading, if you focus on the term, it itself is a critical reading process which consists of an ongoing and repeated encounter with a text, particularly in these times of pandemic when we go back to the classics and read them. There is almost certainly a different kind of interpretation, a different reaction that is that results from our reading process. So what we are, and America particularly in the times during 1920s to 1940s, experienced turmoil and upheaval. It was torn by war, and this period culminated in the 1939 Second World War. So the writers of these period were known as the writers of the lost generation. And if we have the flamboyant lifestyle of Ernest Hemingway, Fitzgerald himself, we have also the divide between the North and the South. And Fitzgerald himself in his novels depict the flamboyance and excess of the age, which he terms as jazz age. And then there is Faulkner, the southern writer who represents the southern county, Mississippi. So we shall be hearing about these three writers, what is the experience of rereading them. And we have between us, I'm so honored and privileged to have between us who have Dr. Tania and Dr. Arpa Ghosh, both both very good friend of mine, and both have kindly consented to be resource persons for these webinars. So in the first session, Dr. Tania Chakraborty will be speaking on Ernest Hemingway. And Dr. Tania Chakraborty, I will introduce you to her, though many of you know her very well, but still it is the protocol of the webinar. So Dr. Tania Chakraborty, she did her honors and masters from Presidency College and Calcutta University, and did her PhD on gender representations in the fiction of Ernest Hemingway under the supervision of Professors Sanjukta Dasgupta, former professor and Dean of Arts of Calcutta University, our very revered teacher. And Tania Chakraborty, Dr. Tania Chakraborty is currently the Dean of Students' Welfare, Diamond Harbour Women's University. She has formerly taught at Sri Shikshayatan College, Kolkata, where she was associate professor, head of the undergraduate department, and coordinator of the postgraduate department of English. And she has also concurrently taught as a guest faculty in the postgraduate department of English, Calcutta University, during 2009 to 2016. Now, Dr. Tania Chakraborty visited the US to participate in an academic group project strengthening and widening the scope of American studies. The US experience in 2010 as part of the prestigious International Visitor Leadership Program. Now, her areas of academic interest include gender studies, American literature, and literature of the diaspora. She is very much into writing poetry herself, and she is presently the Joint Secretary, Executive Council of the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library, and the first coordinator and steering committee member of the American Literature and Culture Interest Group, a cultural group aided by the US Consulate General, Kolkata. So now I invite Tania. Tania, a very warm welcome to you. Please come in this virtual platform, and we are eagerly waiting for you to deliver your deliver your lecture on Ernest Hemingway, rereading Ernest Hemingway. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Tania Chakraborty. Tania, is there a problem, Tania? I hope there are no glitches. Tania, are you were with us? Yes, Tania, you are with
She is
us.
muted. She is muted.
Tania, please unmute
You have to unmute
yourself.
yourself.
Tania, you have to unmute yourself, please. Tania, you have to unmute yourself. I request you to wait a minute.
Participants, please have patience. I request Dr. Gupta to please call up Dr. Chakraborty.
As I have found out, she is Tania. Dr. Tania Chakraborty is in a call. must be an important
Yeah, is the
call. She will be
microphone on?
joining us very soon. Yes. Thank you. Tania is here. So over to you, Tania, now for your presentation. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. For some reason, I could not unmute myself. So right now, I guess I'm visible and audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Sorry, technical glitches. I was ready, but for some reason, the mic just wouldn't start. So, good evening. I'm delighted having been invited to speak in this state level webinar of BANIPUR MAHILA MAHAVIDYALAYA, a webinar organized by the Department of English and the Internal Quality Assurance Cell, or IQAC. I formally wish to thank the principal of BANIPUR MAHILA MAHAVIDYALAYA, Dr. Bidisha Ghosh, the head of the Department of English and moderator for this webinar, Dr. Shomana Gupta, and the IQAC coordinator, Dr. Mohua Basu. And informally, I would also like to add that Professor Shomana Gupta and I have been friends since our university days. And I'm very happy to share this webinar platform with Dr. Arpa Ghosh, who I also know since my college days, a scholar and a creative writer. I look forward to reading her stories in The Statesman as and when they appear. And as Professor Shomana Gupta already said, I will speak on Hemingway and Dr. Ghosh will speak on Faulkner and Fitzgerald. Just a little, informal information. Fitzgerald and Hemingway were good friends. Fitzgerald was the one who introduced Hemingway to Scribners. And Fitzgerald, since I'll be speaking on gender, Fitzgerald's full name was F. Scott Fitzgerald, and F stood for Francis. And he carefully kept the name hidden because the name was effete by American standards. He thought it was effeminate. So Hemingway, in turn, satirized him as Francis Macomber in the very famous short story. And Zelda Fitzgerald actually was a prototype for Catherine Bone in the Garden of Eden. I have prepared a PowerPoint. So I'm going to, somebody else is presenting.
I would request again to the participants, please stop presenting and let the speaker present.
Yes. Is it visible? Is the slide visible?
Yes, it is visible now, madam.
Okay. Right. Mother, other, not other. A brief analysis of Ernest Hemingway and gender. As you have guessed, I will speak about the mother, Ernest Hemingway's mother too, and obvious Oedipal impulses in men and in Ernest Hemingway. And instead of beginning with his mother, I will instead begin with Ernest Hemingway's parents. Nancy Chodorow, in The Reproduction of Mothering, Psychoanalysis and the Sociology of Gender, suggests that shared parenting has a profound effect on the sense of sex difference, gender identity, and sexual preference. Ernest Hemingway's parents, born before their times, need close analysis. Hemingway's parents belonged to pioneer families, and both of his grandfathers were Civil War veterans. Ernest's mother, Grace Hall, like her mother, Caroline Hancock Hall, was a soprano. Because of a childhood disease, Grace could not bear the glare of footlights, and so she waived her aspirations to be an opera singer and chose to be a wife and a mother. But all her life, she retained her artistic imagination and restlessness. She was a women's rights activist with strong views and a fierce sense of freedom. Grace Hall gave music lessons and earned considerably more than her husband. And she used that sum of money for parties, pleasure trips, and concerts. Dr. Clarence Edmonds Hemingway, with a specialization in obstetrics, was a devoted husband and father. He prepared the children's breakfast and served breakfast to Grace in bed. So Grace ruled like Molly Bloom, you can say. He bought groceries, did most of the cooking, took care of the laundry, and supervised the servants and managed the household along with his medical responsibilities. Clarence Hemingway founded the Oak Park chapter of the Agassiz Club, a nature study organization for children named after naturalist Louis Agassiz. He was a marvelous shooter with both shotgun and rifle, an accomplished fisherman, excelling every technique for surviving in a wilderness, and he tried to instill the same kinds of masculine and Christian values in his son. The raising of tomboy girls as well as manly sons was part of the family plan. He taught not just his sons, Ernest and Lester, but also his wife and daughters the masculine pleasures of boating, fishing, shooting, hunting, and butchering. So I'll go back to the first slide with the claim that Ernest Hemingway indeed had parents who practiced and taught gender role reversals. I will now request you to look at these pictures very carefully. You see, Grace Hemingway practiced androgyny and gender blurring in bringing up her children. Grace dressed up her son Ernest in girls' clothing, often in her own baby clothes. You can look at the slide on the picture on the left. As was customary in the Victorian age, she also dressed up the children as siblings of the same sex. This was done so that Ernest and Marceline, older by a year, could appear to be twins. The picture in the middle shows Ernest and Marceline dressed as twins, not just twins, as twin girls. And Ernest sported long hair like his sister till he turned 7. The picture on the right. And then the hairs of both the children were cut in the summer of 1906. So the twinning had a significant impact on young Ernest's mind. Greenacre opines that a predisposition toward fetishism in men is found in households in which there are 2 children of opposite sex, either twins or only a year or 2 apart in age, who are constantly cared for together, daily bathed and dressed together. Fetishist men often get fixated in the phallic stage, and they come to view women as the other and also the not other. Ernest's hair and dress, matching with Marceline's, must have had a confusing effect on the early formation of his ego, gender identity, and body image. It must have led to, as Carl Levy says, a prolonged and intense stage of primary identification, as well as an intense and irreconcilable need to individuate, casting doubt upon fundamental questions as, am I a boy or a girl? What is me and what is not me? Male children, confused about the boundaries of ego, the sexed body, and the constructed gender status, also become susceptible to fantasies of dismemberment, leading to Oedipal castration anxiety. That Hemingway nurtured androgynous and homoerotic desires is evident in his semi-autobiographical texts, which contained autosuggestions. Androgyny, homoeroticism, castration anxiety all find a place in Ernest Hemingway's texts. The little profile of Grace Hemingway that I presented to you must have attracted you. But Grace was hated by her famous son, as per memoirs meted out by his family, friends, and associates. He viewed his mother's strength as domineering and viewed his father as a castrated, helpless, and passive individual, and so he tried to maintain the upper hand in his own marital relationships. The detestation of the mother, however, did not impede his desire to seek maternal qualities in his lovers and wives. In his youth, Ernest Hemingway sought the love of women, some of whom were considerably older. Katie Smith, older by 8 years. The nurse, Agnes von Kurowski, older by 7.5. His wife, Hadley Richardson, older by 8 years. His second wife, Pauline Pfeiffer, older by 4 years. And Ernest Hemingway also continued to adore the new woman, who you can see was not unlike Grace Hemingway in many ways. Again, I'll show you a few pictures. This slide includes all of his wives. You see, Pauline Pfeiffer, Martha Gellhorn, Mary Welsh. They were all spirited journalists. Gellhorn was a novelist too. Call them tomboyish or androgynous by the standards of the 1920s and 30s. All of Ernest Hemingway's wives showed fearlessness, bravado, and eagerness in outdoor activities. One should mention each one's easygoing companionship. Hadley's hiking and skiing, there's Hadley. Pauline's love for marlin fishing, riding and shooting. Martha's hunting, and Mary's expertise as deep sea fisherwoman. Parallel to the rise of the women's movement, at the turn of the century, a figure who contributed much to the creation of an American masculine construct was President Theodore Roosevelt. The most famous advocate of the strenuous life of muscularity, rough sports, prize fighting, and hunting as an antidote to the over-civilization of American men. Now, why is it that Americans thought that they were being over-civilized? You see, this was also the time when corporate jobs first began. For the affluent middle class, middle class men working as entrepreneurs, professionals, and managers in white-collar jobs, their work no longer confirmed masculinity, because there was no physical exertion involved. as compared to those who performed manual blue-collar jobs, that is the working class. In addition, as John Rayburn says, public distrust of artists and intellectuals has long been common in American culture. American popular culture is replete with portraits of effeminate, snobbish, immoral artists and intellectuals. In Bengali literature, you can think of characters like Pelobrai and Lali Mampal Pung. The Pung attached to his name so as to prove a point that after all, these are also men. So in anti-intellectualism in American life, Richard Hofstadter, invoking a well-established preconception, writes, I quote, "The politicians argued that culture is impractical and men of culture are ineffectual, that culture is feminine and cultivated men tend to be effeminate." Unquote. So in spite of having dually gendered parents, Hemingway probably half believed in these prejudices. After all, he had taken after his mother, choosing not his father's medical profession, but to indulge in writing and creativity. So it is not surprising that he consciously projected the image of Hemingway, the sportsman, the world traveler, a man associated with bullfighting, big game hunting, marlin fishing, et al. In an interview, he spoke of his literary rivals in terms of boxing. What did he say? I started out very quiet and I beat Mr. Turgenev. Then I trained hard and I beat Mr. De Maupassant. I fought 2 draws with Mr. Stendhal. And I think I had an edge in the last one. But nobody is going to get me in any ring with Mr. Tolstoy unless I'm crazy or I keep getting better. Unquote. So these are pictures of Hemingway fishing for marlin. So the frequent appearance of Hemingway's picture in newspapers and magazines fostered the impression of his virility. And photographs and drawings emphasized his rugged handsomeness, and numerous articles and features portrayed him engaged in sport. Right. I should go on to the next slide because the slide showing this very handsome man will actually distract us. Right. The Papa persona and his display of machismo made many admirers forget the serious writer at the desk. After all, Hemingway was primarily a writer. He had learned much by incessantly reading literature, though I must add, unlike many of his close friends, he did not possess a degree from an Ivy League institute. But he read good literature and he imbibed much as an expatriate American who visited Europe and lived for a considerable period of time in the cultural capital of Europe, Paris. So I will approach his depiction of women and of gender issues by placing them in historical and biographical contexts. As Dr. Shumana Gupta mentioned, yes, it's all about rereading the authors that we have loved reading all our lives. So this reading of mine is a gendered rereading. I have limited myself to 3 texts and 3 women because of time constraints. So the text I'm going to begin with is The Sun Also Rises. Ernest Hemingway's first novel, The Sun Also Rises, appeared on October 22nd, 1926. This book made him almost instantly an international celebrity, identified with an entire generation. So along with post-war ennui, disorientation and aimlessness, Hemingway also exposes the gradual dissolution of gender constructions and sexual mores and ethics. The Sun Also Rises has a fine representation of the free-thinking, sexually emancipated new woman. The novel is aptly set in Paris, where in the 1920s, there were about 80 feminist societies with more than 60,000 enrolled members. In Paris, most of the women Ernest and Hadley Hemingway encountered championed sexual liberation. Period photographs of Montparnasse reveal studio models, dancers, artists, and women writers swimming and partying in mixed groups, cross-dressed in male attire or posing in the nude. In Paris, the Hemingways met Sylvia Beach, Natalie Barney, Janet Flanner, Hilda Doolittle, Margaret Anderson, and of course, Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, among many others. The modern woman of the 1920s evolved out of predecessors who had rebelled against gender stereotypes for about 4 decades. The new woman emerging as a type in the 1890s rebelled against conventional and socially and sexually segregated behavior. For the first time in history, a free and easy exchange and friendship between the two sexes commenced, which earned them the ill repute of having loose morals. The best known manifestation of the new woman was the urban, sexually permissive flapper. Dolores Varacano Schmidt questions this sudden change in the socio-cultural fabric. She asks, I quote, "If a woman had new rights and powers, had men lost old ones? If femininity no longer consisted of cooking and sewing and tending the babies, what did it consist of? Or did it cease to exist? What about masculinity? It is surely no coincidence that the themes of sexual identity, of homosexuality, of proving one's manhood in sexual terms, of impotent and unfulfilled lives dominate the literature of the 20s in America." Unquote. So in The Sun Also Rises, Jake Barnes, like the young Ernest Hemingway, is a man trying to come to terms with a world in which gender roles were changing. It is at a party at the dance club that Brett Ashley and Jake Barnes are first introduced to the reader, both coming in with inappropriate companions. Brett with homosexual men and Jake with a female prostitute, Georgette. This immediately alerts the reader to interpret Brett and Jake in terms of a sexuality that is not a part of the heteronormative frame. The central characters, Jake and Brett, become bodies of contradictions. So the reader gets drawn to a vortex of an aberrant socio-sexual order. Georgette and Brett become adjoined under the pairing of prostitution, promiscuity, just as Jake and the young men are connected under the pairing of sexually maimed and homosexual. A hybrid between two traditional images, the wife and the prostitute. Brett, as a socialite, accepts money and protection from men, and in exchange offers them her body and her flattering presence. Modeled after the real-life flapper and aristocrat, Lady Duff Twisden, it's a very blurred image, but at least we can see her. Brett's quasi-transvestism also adds to gender ambiguity. Interestingly, many artists and lesbians of the modernist era embraced male clothing, which they hailed as a mark of freedom from the strictures of what society defined as feminine. Susan Bubar says that for such women, cross-dressing had become a way of addressing and redressing the inequities of categories of masculinity and femininity defined by culture. In the Jake-Brett relationship, the traditional gender roles become fluid and flexible. Brett shows virtues of toughness, straightforwardness, aggression, resilience, stoicism, and assertiveness. These are stereotypical characteristics associated with men. And ironically, the war wound, puts Jake in the feminine position of lack. Jake is tender, gentle-natured, emotional, with low pain tolerance, and with the ability to listen and to care. So these are stereotyped characteristics associated with women. You could say that Jake's portrayal is almost like a suffering wife who's tied to a spouse who's given to philandering. What sustains their relationship and also makes them representative figures of the modern man and the new woman, as opposed to the old prudish Victorian order, is their friendship. As Jake says, women made such swell friends, awfully swell. This particular element of friendship is missing in the other pair that is shown in the text, that of Robert Conn and Frances. An unmistakable influence on this Hemingway novel was Vincenzo Blasco Ibanez's novel, Blood and Sand. Both Ibanez's and Hemingway's play with gender inversion is sociologically validated by one of Hemingway's favorite authors, the sexual theorist Havelock Ellis, who speaks about certain masculine traits in Spanish women. In Blood and Sand, Dona Sol seduces the younger Gallardo, which ruins his entire career and life. And in The Sun Also Rises, Brett seduces Pedro Romero. Parallels between Ibanez's novel and Hemingway's are obvious, but you see, Hemingway was not just rewriting Ibanez's novel. Brett's brief liaison with Romero throws new light on her character and on Jake's, we must say, and it further complicates the network of ambiguities in the text pertaining to sexuality and gender. Jake's attraction for the boyish-looking Brett can be viewed as having partially homoerotic overtones. Jake finds Romero to be the best-looking boy he had ever seen. As Jake continues to gaze at Romero's body, he finds that his skin is clear and smooth, that his hand was very fine, and the wrist was small. Brett and the men also continue to say that he is nice and lovely and beautiful to look at. As Judith Butler opines, I quote, the sex-gender distinction suggests a radical discontinuity between sexed bodies and culturally constructed genders. Man and masculine might just as easily signify a female body as a male one, and woman and feminine a male body as easily as a female one. Unquote. So Romero's body, like Gallardo's, is androgynous, which blends the masculine and the feminine. Alan Josephs observes that there is no more androgynous male in Western culture than the wasp-waisted, lace-fronted, pink-stockinged, ballet-slippered, gold-bespangled killer of bulls. Interesting comment. The moment the heterosexual Jake pimps for Brett and Romero is the moment when the text blurs heterosexual and homosexual desire within the desiring body. Heterosexuality blends with homosexuality as the genders get blurry. And in Brett's manner of giving up Romero, Hemingway allots her a moment of maternal feeling that alleviates her masculine image as a Carmen who loves and leaves whomever she pleases. So Brett remains a transitional figure, neither the traditional docile wife in need of protection, nor the modern liberated, financially independent and self-reliant woman. Yet, the actions of Jake and Brett transcend and destabilize the boundaries of gender. I will just take a sip of water. And I'll begin with my analysis of the next novel, A Farewell to Arms. Linda Wagner Martin points out that whether in the guise of bullfight adventure or war novel, Hemingway's real subject was eroticism. In A Farewell to Arms, published in 1929, though there are descriptions of military action and men connected with the war, yet the focus of the novel remains love, sexuality, and human relationships. In contemporary readings and in mine, Catherine Barclay reveals herself not to be docile, submissive, and self-effacing, but an independent, strong, and heroic individual. Let's see how. Catherine Barclay was amalgamated of the brave and strong nurse Agnes von Kurowski, the ruthless Duff Trisden, the stoical Hadley Richardson Hemingway, and his current wife, Pauline Pfeiffer Hemingway. She is provided with a traumatic past, just like Brett Ashley, having had a fiancé of 8 years lost to the war. With Catherine's grief is coupled a sense of guilt. In spite of war stress, Catherine allows, rather insists, Frederick to launch a pretense of love, making Frederick a substitute for her dead fiancé. Catherine does not really abnegate herself to Frederick Henry, the lieutenant, whom she barely knows at this point, but to a personal idea. At this point, at the beginning of their fated relationship, Catherine knows more about suffering and death than the soldier Frederick. So emerging as a figure typical of Hemingway, heroic and stoical, Catherine Barclay accepts her pain and tries to begin life afresh. Like Bronte's Heathcliff, she becomes obsessed with recreating the past. Heathcliff actually responds to what Freud had termed a repetition compulsion, where the psyche, disturbed by a shock which it cannot absorb or surmount, is unable to achieve psychic wholeness until the subject relives and retrospectively binds the excess of emotion that is the cause of his illness. As Lisa Tyler says, Catherine chooses, unlike Heathcliff, to relive her trauma constructively rather than destructively. So she tries to give Frederick what she had denied her fiancé, rather than to try to inflict on him the pain that she had suffered. So Catherine becomes her own therapist, and she tries to overcome her trauma through, again, in Freudian terms, through transference. It is Frederick's war wound that changes the course of events drastically. It enables Catherine to actualize her romantic fantasy of caring for a wounded lover and relieves her of the guilt feelings that she had nurtured for depriving her fiancé of her love. Not only does Frederick's lust change to love, he also becomes fearful and vulnerable and psychically dependent on Catherine. You may say that these are all feminine traits. More crucially, as Mark Spilka points out, he's like a woman in the lovemaking that takes place in the hospital room at night. He has to lie on his back to perform properly, given the nature of his leg wounds, and Catherine has to lie on top of him. So this is not the missionary position. This parallels Ernest and Hadley's way of making love, as implied in A Movable Feast, and Ernest and Mary's, as recorded in How It Was. But Hemingway gave fullest expression to such feminizations of men in The Garden of Eden and Islands in the Stream, both published posthumously. Catherine, who is monogamous, loyal, principled, and with strong ethical standards, begins to question Frederick on the morning of his operation about the behavior of whores. The questions do not spew out of idle curiosity. Catherine promises, satisfied with Frederick's lie, I'll say just what you wish, I'll do what you wish, there isn't any me anymore. Earlier critics read Catherine as an idealized and objectified daydream and male fantasy. You see, a love slave, and these works as self-effacement. But you see, the 1920s were days before the concept of consensual sex. And if sex happened between well-bred people, a declaration of love was a prerequisite. As a nurse, she is forbidden to have romantic or sexual relationships with men under her charge. So here again, she indulges in another game, in which there is a new role for her to play, that of the whore or the bad girl. So this role playing as a bad girl allows her to enjoy illicit sex in stolen moments. The author underscores a break from idealization and objectification. Catherine resists marriage simply because she does not want to be separated from Frederick. And with Catherine beside him, their world becomes idyllic and Edenic, you may say. It would be interesting to add that Hemingway, in his personal and his professional life, detested women who competed with men. Flappers, careerists, social and political revolutionists, thinkers. He, however, liked contemporary modern women who, as bearers of culture, applied domestic values to the public sphere. All sociologists and social thinkers would agree that this factor, I mean, Hemingway was not the only man to think along these lines. This factor eventually led to the backlash of women into the private sphere from the 1930s. So, yes, getting back to the text, Catherine's pregnancy eventually destroys the shared Edenic love. The child who they refer to as young Catherine turns out to be a male child, a son. So it is impossible to recall a Hemingway text where a mother begets a daughter. In many of his texts, particularly short stories, paternity and death are powerfully linked. Right now, I can think of the Indian camp. Such fear becomes an indication of rejection of maturity by Frederick, the Oedipal child man. As Catherine dies in childbirth, Frederick writes, it was like saying goodbye to a statue. So Hemingway actually reduces Catherine Barclay to the level of a cold piece of stone, but an artistically shaped one. The Pygmalion myth here is acted out in reverse. Hemingway had thought of calling this novel a sentimental education after Flaubert. With the death of the objectified Catherine, Frederick finally gains knowledge about death. He, however, decides that he would not reenact his relationship with another person as Catherine had done, because he has had his beloved acting throughout as his teacher and mentor in matters of psychological survival. This also is a break from the Victorian marriage concept, because in the generation preceding Hemingway's own, it was the husband who was expected to teach the wife everything. That is why, the preference for older, experienced men as husbands. So here, with the death of the objectified Catherine, Frederick finally gains knowledge about death, as I said, but he decides that he would not reenact his relationship with another person as Catherine had done, because he has had her acting as his teacher. Peter Brooks proposes a model of narrative in Reading for the Plot that has its basis in psychoanalysis, where, I quote, analysis works toward the more precise and orderly recollection of the past, no longer compulsively repeated, insistently reproduced in the present, but ordered as a retrospective narrative, unquote. Hemingway was actually lacerated by rejection by his first love, Agnes von Kurowski. And he kept on referring to this throughout his life in his novels and his short stories, many of the short stories actually. So here, he overcomes his immense grief by transforming his personal calamity into fiction. And his fictional creation, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, does the same. A step ahead of Brett Ashley, you could say. Not only is Catherine sexually emancipated, she is financially independent, responsible, strong, and heroic. In spite of generating immense mental and moral strength, she is denied full subjectivity, but only in the end. This will take me to my third novel, also a war novel. In the other war novel that Hemingway wrote, For Whom the Bell Tolls, published on 21st October 1940, unlike Pablo, Kashkin, and Finito, the Spanish men who are all emasculated, Robert Jordan, the protagonist, emerges triumphant. retaining his masculine identity and courage. He gains self-knowledge through his mission and through his brief association with the two women in the novel, the enduring Pilar and the suffering Maria. Pilar, like Grace Hemingway, is experienced, mature, confident, nurturing, self-reliant, and with fine leadership qualities, who takes over from her husband the charge of their guerrilla group. She is a blend of the maternal type with the lesbian type. And she owes her construction to Gertrude Stein, for whom Hemingway actually nurtured an edible attraction. Like Stein, she shows bisexual tendencies, combining a masculine massiveness with gentle feminine qualities. According to Comley and Scholes, her character should be read as one of Hemingway's many explorations of the conundrum of sex and gender. Pilar's mannishness or lack of femininity is heightened if her age is considered. To David Reuben, a post-menopausal woman is, I quote, not really a man, but no longer a functional woman. These individuals live in the world of intersex, unquote. At the outset, Pilar's relationship with Maria poses problems for Robert Jordan. In spite of the quasi-erotic stroking and Pilar's constant declaration that she is jealous, there is also a denial of lesbianism. Actually, there is nothing between them that is explicitly sexual, you see. I think you can see Rennie Vivian's poem, which I've put on the slide too. Our bodies are made alike, our destiny the same. In you I love my child, my darling, and my sister. These lines are quoted in Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. And going by Beauvoir's analysis, in this case too, the mirroring assumes a maternal cast. She says, the mother has in common with the lesbian the longing to protect and cradle a soft carnal object in her arms. The middle-aged Pilar boastfully says she could have been an erotic force to reckon with had she still been young. So later she becomes a vicarious participant in Maria's consummated love for Robert Jordan. I could add, interestingly, Spanish women called Pilar usually have the full name of Maria del Pilar. So in a sense, Maria, who is Pilar's protege, can be seen as an extension of the older woman. In stark contrast to Pilar is the 19-year-old Maria. Young, fresh, beautiful, associated all through the novel with sunlight, warmth, and the good earth. The novel first shows her as an unspoiled virgin who is raped, spoiled, and traumatized by fascists. She is an incarnation of primordial Spain after the Civil War broke out in July 1936. Betrayed by right-wing politicians, Hitler and Mussolini, by left-wing communists, and by her own innocence, ignorance, ineptitude. Maria's trauma is worse than Brett Ashley and Catherine Barkley as she experiences violence firsthand. She witnesses her parents' murders. She herself is brutally degraded and raped. And then she witnesses the rape of her girlfriends. And Maria, violated by men, is given by Pilar the psychiatrist, in this case, to another man. Who's this other man? It is Robert Jordan, and he gives her back her sense of self. Now, Maria's readiness with Robert Jordan in terms of sex seems a little odd at first. At Pilar's instruction, she almost flirts with him. Again, earlier critics thought of her as a love slave. So with playful exchanges, she initiates mutual physical attraction, which sets the stage for an emotionally fulfilling sexual encounter. Again, I would insist, like Catherine Barkley, it is Maria who controls the sexual encounter rather than submitting to it. She decides at Pilar's behest that she will no longer remain an emotionally broken victim of war. Ayn Rand stated in The Fountainhead, the sexual act is an act, I quote, that could be performed in tenderness as a seal of love, or in contempt as a symbol of humiliation and conquest. It could be the act of a lover, or the act of a soldier, violating an enemy bone. Unquote. So here Maria consciously chooses to make love to Robert Jordan and expects him to reciprocate. And Jordan, if you think of this man's feminization too, he also ceases to be a man cold in the head, that is, possessing only dispassionate intellect. So through his kissing and his lovemaking, Jordan makes Maria whole again. So Maria is bestowed a woman's right. No, why am I saying a woman's right? She is given a human's right to her own bodily integrity as she effaces her rape and voluntarily accepts Jordan as her lover. So one sexual encounter had initiated trauma, another erases it. So Hemingway here again portrays woman not as a possession or property, but as an individual who chooses to accept and to defy men. I was given 30 minutes, but when I timed myself, I saw that it was a little over 40. So, time to sum up. In conclusion, I would say that since the late 1960s, the male-oriented focus of early male critics has been challenged. That is why the rereading, which is still continuing. So this has led to extensive re-evaluation of Hemingway, the writer's life and works. Hemingway's most compelling female characters have their genesis in the real-life women. One needs to re-examine not just Hemingway's fictional females, but also the real-life women. His mother, sisters, wives, friends, lovers, all accomplished, diverse and complex, who helped shape his art. I have referred to just a few because I have limited myself only to 3 texts. His androgynous impulses contradict the machismo of the mythical Papa Hemingway. After all, this was a myth that he himself had created. Though I agree with Linda Wagner Martin's declaration that women are never central to any Hemingway work on their own terms, I also wish to remind you that gender was Hemingway's steady concern. His female characters are drawn with complexity and individuality equal to Hemingway's male characters. Women in Ernest Hemingway's novels manifest endurance and stoic courage. They manifest grace under pressure. All these traits that young male protagonists are famed for. So we could say that the female protagonists are also bearers of the Hemingway code. The posthumously published novel, The Garden of Eden, particularly reinstates the claim that gender issues and sexual ambiguities like androgyny, bisexuality, role transformation, etc., have always been present in Hemingway's work. So, thank you from Hemingway and from me. And I'm sorry about the technical glitch. I got so worked up that I was trying to call Dr. Kumana Gupta to save me from distress. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tania, for this very interesting lecture. It was a delight to hear you after a so long time, and it's really, I'm really enjoying meeting you, though it's a virtual platform after so many years. So I suppose I'm sure that this was a very engaging discussion and it would garner many questions, which some of which, if time permits, I will take up in the interactive session. Now, without wasting and without keeping Dr. Arpa Ghosh waiting, our favorite Arpa Di, as I call her, she is senior to me. So I will I will request Iphita Bhattacharya of my department to introduce the second speaker, Dr. Arpa Ghosh.
Thank you, madam. Good evening, everyone. I shall be carrying forward this webinar by introducing to you all our second speaker of this evening, Dr. Arpa Ghosh. Arpa madam teaches English literature in Vivekananda College for Women. She has done her doctoral research on South African white fiction and has completed 2 minor research projects on the Bengali master text and magic realism. She has constantly been speaking on subjects of her choice in national and international conferences, both in India and abroad. She also contributes greatly to national and international peer-reviewed journals. Her areas of interests are contemporary theory, culture, and fiction. She is also a great short story writer, and her stories are regularly published in The Statesman. So in today's webinar, she is going to talk about the American writers F. Scott Fitzgerald and William Faulkner. Now, I would like to request Dr. Arpa Ghosh Madam to take over. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are, Arpa.
All right.
But it's a little unclear, I think. You have to adjust your laptop or camera. Yes, okay. It's okay now.
Now, wait. Well, I'll just lift it up a bit. Yes. Is it better? Is it better?
Oh, I can't see. No, no. The previous one was better.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Very good evening. So, do I begin presenting now, or when I turn on my PPT? Yes.
Yes.
Should I begin presenting, or?
Yes. Please do, Arpa, please do.
All right. Yes, very good evening to everyone who took time out to listen to us. It's a great pleasure. So first, a few thank yous. Big thank you to the organizers of this delightful webinar. The organizers in Banipur Women's College, and my dear friend Shumana, who I deeply admire and love. Shumana, you are a fighter. Congratulations, Tania, on your brilliant presentation, and thank you for your warm reference to our college days. Seems quite far away now. Now, without further ado, I would like to switch over to my PowerPoint presentation and begin my talk. Yes. Okay. Yes, can everyone see the slideshow? I hope. Yes. So I have named, yes, please, someone, Tumona, someone else, please give me a signal that you can hear and see the slideshow.
Okay,
Hello?
I think Ritu Porna is there to help you. Ritu Porna,
Yes.
she will be there with you, Arpadi, so don't worry, please.
All right. So
Please
I'm
proceed
beginning
with your
my
presentation.
okay. Now I have named my presentation Tales of North and South, Scott Fitzgerald and William Faulkner. Now, of course, Tania has talked about Ernest Hemingway, so there will be a few overlapping, regions there. Uh, Yes, the two pictures. These two, very luckily, I got from the internet. In fact, I got all my pictures from the internet. So to your left, you have William Faulkner, the very sexual male author, careless about his appearance, with a manly pipe and an untidy hat, not very, conscious of the camera. To your right, you have metrosexual Scott Fitzgerald, presenting his best profile to the camera, very well lit. It is a studio portrait, that much is sure. Wonderful hairstyle, natty jacket. So one had a light, bright, sparkly, gossipy, journalistic style with rainbow bursts of beauty. We all know who we are talking of, Fitzgerald. The other is dark, moody, baroque, convoluted, difficult, gothic, and grotesque. So they are, at first glance, different from each other as chalk is from cheese. First part of my talk is the Scott Fitzgerald chapter, or the Roaring Twenties. The Roaring Twenties, and the 1920s, have often been compared to, in America, have often been compared to the 16th century England, when the country was sizzling with creative activity and with economic prosperity. The world seemed to be, England's oyster. So that is the Roaring Twenties of America for you. Major writers of the North: Scott Fitzgerald. The representative 20s dramatist would be Eugene O'Neill. Dorothy Parker, the Empress of Wisecracks, very satirical, very dry, acerbic humor. The socialite and intellectual. Ring Lardner, Thomas Wolfe, autobiographist, novelist. Langston Hughes, representative black poet, political activist. Harry Crosby, poet, heart-trained novelist, and of course, Ernest Hemingway. Now, Harry Crosby, heart-trained, Ernest Hemingway, Thomas Wolfe. So many of these people are voluntary exiles to Paris. So Paris was in the 20s the Mecca of American intellectuals. They went there to get wasted. They went there to find themselves. They went there because Paris was cheap and provided the necessary getaway for their non-conventional, non-conformist life. The fashionable couple, Scott and Zelda, with their little girl, Scotty, all posing for the camera. So they are very aware of their celebrity status. And Scott Fitzgerald is unimaginable without Zelda. Now, it would be a bit too much to say that Scott Fitzgerald invented the flapper, but definitely with considerable assistance from his wife, he did offer an image of the modern young woman who was spoiled, sexually liberated, self-centered, fun-loving, and magnetic. So this is the young Zelda with a cigarette from her lips, her sexy, skimpy, flapper costume, her young jewelry, her stylish bob. Very irresponsible, and in his dedication of Flaming Youth, a 20s bestseller, the author describes Zelda as restless, seductive, greedy, discontented, craving sensation, unrestrained, a little morbid, more than a little selfish. And it just goes on and on. Now, where did this, restlessness, where did this love for independence and freedom, this breaking free from Victorian stereotypes of mother, wife, daughter come from? Essentially, it came from certain, technological, tools that were now available to women, majorly contraceptives, majorly, the freedom to smoke, drink. So for the first time, men were, freeing themselves from their tertiary roles in patriarchy and coming of their own. So whether it was in their dress or in their hairstyle, they were, completely breaking free from Victorian stereotypes. But if they were saying no to Victorian bondage, they were saying yes to another kind of bondage, which is also relevant to our own age. They had to keep going back to the beauty parlors to touch up their makeup and stuff. So essentially, this is some kind of, you can say, bondage to the billion-dollar beauty industry that is, very prosperous at that point of time. So the liberated socialite of the 20s New York. This picture I personally found to be rather iconic. The 1920s marked a boom in the automobile industry. So here you have the flapper who is not only driving her own car, but changing her tires. So she's changing a flat. Then if there is a, a personality who is even more colorful than Jay Gatsby, the protagonist of The Great Gatsby, it could be Howard Hughes, who is aviator, tycoon, innovator. His best friends were Ava Gardner and Katharine Hepburn. He had his finger in every pie, major pie, whether it was the aeroplane industry or Hollywood. Many say that he's the inventor of the bra. Finally, we find him, him collapsing into obsessive compulsive disorder. And of course, today we are well versed with this character because Leonardo DiCaprio made it come alive for us in The Aviator. Incidentally, at this very moment, they're showing Aviator on Star TV. Very sorry if you're missing it for this talk. 1920s aeroplanes. It's not that aeroplanes were not used in World War I, but there they were used mainly for reconnaissance. Here in the 20s, the aeroplane industry became viable because of another aviator, the actual aviator, Charles Lindbergh, who for the first time flew from Long Island to Paris, thereby giving viability and economic stability to the industry. So you can see the automobile industry, the aeroplane industry. So these industries are all opening up and giving America a tremendous, gargantuan economic boost. America is beginning to rule the roost, and that, you can say that big brother image is continuing till today. Now, of course, the art of the 1920s, what would that be? Of course, it is Art Deco. So this is a close-up of the roof of the Chrysler Building. Often the Chrysler Building has been described as a church, a cathedral, but a cathedral dedicated to success. Now, Art Deco is you can say it is the preferred art. It is the archetypal art of the 20s because it is machine friendly, progress friendly, it cuts free from previous moorings, it takes into account the accelerated industrialization. Essentially, it is about self-creation, it is about self-absorption, it is about self-glorification. And when you look at Scott Fitzgerald's art, there's a lot of that there too. If we can use one sentence to describe Scott Fitzgerald's art, it is a breaking free from tradition, a breaking free from history. Think of Jay Gatsby, who who very, happily, who very enthusiastically denies his origins and recreates himself from a scratch within a very short time. So with Art Deco, we have the American dream. The American dream, which in the beginning is about equal opportunity, which of the sky being the limit for the brave, people with initiative. But very soon, very quickly, towards the end of the 1920s, it declines to relaxed morals and corruption. And in the 1920s, you have the rise of Hollywood. For obvious reasons. One is Europe was being torn by the war, and creative personalities migrated to America in search of their dreams, to fulfill their creative aspirations. Also, America benefited from the First World War. It took part in the World War, but only for the last 1 year. And it had these protectionist trade laws, which led to far greater exports than imports, which is why money kept pouring into America, as a result of which Hollywood prospered. Now, the two major names associated with 20s Hollywood is, of course, Greta Garbo, star, a diva, very close to our hearts because we associate our own Suchitra Sen with Greta Garbo, her mystery, her mystique, feminine mystique. At the same time, you see a kind of new kind of aura, something that wasn't there before. And of course, the emperor of the 20s, Charles Chaplin, again a migrant from England, whose mother was a vaudeville singer. She lost her voice and they sank to penury. He began his life possibly as a studio boy, job boy, and rose to become an institution. So again, another J. Gatsby, someone who has created himself, who has cut free from his moorings, and who has made his life king size by dint of his own courage and initiative, also with the help of a little luck. The radio, 1920s, the era of the radio which you could say augmented, inflated the individualism of people to a great extent, gave them a kind of, inward looking perspective. Majorly, it brought music to private homes. Previously, people had to go to concerts. Now, the radio was like this huge mouth which constantly demanded be fed with music, information, plays, and so on. So cultural activities saw a huge rise with the coming in of the radio. Therefore, if we think of music, can we not think of the jazz age? Now, of course, the term jazz age was coined by Scott Fitzgerald, but there was this allegation against Scott Fitzgerald and the other white, you can say, poets and intellectuals who visited Harlem in New York regularly to get drunk, to listen, not only on alcohol, but on the music. Terrific music. You can call it the howl of the concrete jungle. So on one hand, jazz is moody, sad, tragic, but on the other hand, it is extremely peppy, it is extremely inspirational. But the real players in the jazz scene were the blacks. Two major names I shall be taking. One is Bessie Smith, the Tennessee girl, and the other is Louis Armstrong, the New Orleans boy. So already you can sense a connection. This is the connection I'm driving at, the fact that these are blacks, talented blacks, unbelievably gifted blacks who are coming up from the South to fill the North with their talent, with their music, with their gifts. So the North's gain is the South's loss during the previous decade, this decade, and then of course in the 30s. 1920. So jazzing, listening to music, Hollywood. So what about alcohol to go with all of this? Because really, it's very difficult to think of dry day parties. So very peculiarly, there was this prohibition law passed by the predominantly Protestant government during this time. So buying alcohol was illegal. Selling alcohol was illegal, but drinking alcohol was not illegal. Very strange. Which is why many doctors, almost all doctors used to prescribe alcohol as medicine. And you have bootleggers, speakeasies of the Prohibition era. And of course, I'm reminded of 60s and 70s India, where there was a lot of smuggling of gold, of alcohol, of diamonds. So you have all the 70s films in which, the villains are usually smugglers. Sometimes the hero is a smuggler too. Think of Diwar, where Amitabh is another J. Gatsby. So here, bootleggers and speakeasies of the Prohibition era who kept on selling alcohol. And since there are so many students in the audience, young people know more than anyone else that the moment you prohibit something, everyone is making a beeline for that. So left to its own resources, no one would have paid any attention. And another very colorful personality of this age is the thug, the mobster, and the self-styled tycoon Al Capone. Al Capone, who made billions of dollars selling alcohol, maintaining bordellos, brothels, drugs. So he had his finger in every crime pile. Now, what is so special about this tycoon? This is a man who did not see himself as a criminal. He saw himself as a businessman. So at the age of 28, he is at his height of power, and he's calling a press conference and telling pressmen that if I am a criminal, then the people who are drinking every night, who are visiting all these sex workers, prostitutes, and who are having a good time, they are criminals as well. If there is demand, there will be supply. And a little bit of this logic, I feel, is being used in The Great Gatsby, where Gatsby, it's indicated that a large part of Gatsby's fortune has come from bootlegging. The rest of it has come from speculation. So definitely shades of all these characters are there in that very, very iconic and representative figure, and that very representative novel, which when I searched the internet, I found that even today, it is the most loved and the most popular and the most read novel, even today. The other Al Pacino, who starred in Scarface being the nickname of Al Capone. He enacted the role of Al Capone. And here again, you see the beautiful Michelle Pfeiffer, one of my favorite actresses, in the flapper costume, very skimpy, and she's a huge attitude, so bobbed hair, dripping diamonds. So definitely the insouciant, irresponsible, self-absorbed, pleasure-loving woman without a thought for the future, who has embraced the present for all it is worth. Then I couldn't resist the temptation of giving this picture. Old money, symbolized by Tom Buchanan, Daisy's husband, to your right, and new money, symbolized by J. Gatsby, and Daisy, the flapper, the beautiful flower-like woman, but hiding a canker in her bosom, hiding a lot of corruption, a lot of pollution, dithering between the two. And old money is being criticized, new money is being romanticized in this novel. Again, that signifies, that indicates a break away from tradition. Now, of course, before moving on to the last two slides of this chapter, I have to talk about one man who traversed a a different route. That is, if there was a whole-scale migration to the north, from the south, from Europe. One man in 1932, he's migrating from America to England. If I could see you face to face, I would have asked you who it is, but I have to provide the answer. It is T.S. Eliot. Now, this is strange. When everyone is making a beeline for the north, why is T.S. Eliot leaving the north and going to England? Possibly because T.S. could be. But T.S. Eliot disliked the atmosphere of the 20s and 30s England. He is a poet and a critic who constantly urges future poets to develop a historical sense, to be aware of their past, of the historical tradition that has gone before, in order to forge themselves, fashion themselves as poets. And he's an exception because no one else was doing that. They were all breaking free from old molds, and they were all embracing the moment. It was a very, very exciting, drunken, hedonistic atmosphere, the 20s. Finally, all this hedonism, drinking, speculation, dishonest speculation, misleading the American public into buying all the wrong shares, this, that, and the other, usher in the Wall Street stock market crash of 1929. The bubble would have burst, but it's not as if people did not know. Majorly, Scott Fitzgerald was well aware that this was going to happen. He kept on saying that this wouldn't last. And in his 1925 novel, Great Gatsby, he says he structures it like a pain, like a song, like a tribute to a time that is already fleeting. So that is the magic of Scott Fitzgerald. All his, self-contradictions. On one hand, he is the party goer. He is the representative socialite celebrity. On the other hand, he's the boy standing outside the window watching the party going on with him. On one hand, he is extremely excited. On the other hand, he's suffering from disenchantment. On one hand, he's ambitious. On the other, he's disappointed. So these self-contradictions make him the majorly representative writer of chronicler of 20s North America. Bipolar disorder. I'm not sure whether Scott Fitzgerald had bipolar disorder, but definitely he suffered from chronic depression, 1930s onward. His wife Zelda completely succumbed to it. She went on to have schizophrenia and finally died in her sanatorium, which got burnt down. Many great writers, poets, and composers suffered from bipolar disorder. During their manic phase, creativity surged, but not during their depressed phase. So we have Whitman, Woolf, Clemens, Hemingway, Scott Fitzgerald, Anne Rice, and also Mark Twain, if my sources are correct. So with this, for the moment, I come to the end of the Fitzgerald chapter. Moving on to the next part, the William Faulkner chapter, Slavery and Racism Critiqued by Southern Renaissance. Incidentally, William Faulkner and Scott Fitzgerald are more or less contemporaries. They are just divided by a year. So Scott Fitzgerald was born in 1896 and William Faulkner was born in 1897. So more or less the same age, which makes their juxtaposition very, very interesting. Now, when we come to the South, what kind of picture do we encounter? Yes, William Faulkner is one of the major players of the Southern Renaissance. Who are the other players? Major writers, William Faulkner, Robert Penn Warren, who wrote at least one beautiful novel, All the King's Men, Tennessee Williams, the representative playwright of the 30s, Alan Tate, Thomas Wolfe, Catherine Ann Porter, Margaret Mitchell, the whose Gone with the Wind has achieved mythical status, among others, because there are lots and lots of writers, majorly women. But one interesting point here is that you don't have a single black writer. Not that there were black writers, there were, but they are not included in the Southern Renaissance. Now, why is this? Is there some racism in question? I really don't think so. What is happening here is the white man is finding himself at the tail end of history. He is finding himself in some kind of final dystopia. He's finding himself in an empty landscape. So majorly all these writers, in significant ways, they are subscribing to the empty landscape mode or motive. So on one hand, this kind of structure, it is a result of complete breakdown, complete collapse of communication between black and white. So in which the white recedes into some kind of a paranoia, some kind of a state of madness, inner madness or mental disturbance. On the other hand, and here it is true in the case of the South, the landscape actually empties out. So let us go into that in greater detail. Now, this is a picture of agriculture in antebellum America. Antebellum is the time before 1861, the year of the beginning of Civil War, which the South lost. Not only historically, but it suffered huge losses financially and from point of view of its image. It got completely devastated. It lost its prestige, perhaps forever. Now, even though you can see you see these figures from behind, you can make out that they are blacks. So majorly black labor was used. And it was not only used, but the whites were dependent, very strongly dependent on the blacks for their economy, for their prosperity, for their very existence, because the South was essentially an agrarian economy. The traditional antebellum Southern belle. So look at these pictures. Most of the pictures on internet were, those of Vivian Lee. So I was very strongly tempted to use one of her pictures. If you look at these girls, they are very conscious of their roles as aristocratic, privileged Southern white women, dressed in Victorian finery. Compare this with the Flappers picture, and immediately you can see the difference. Very, very traditional, very, very clumsy, very, what in Urdu we call nazakat, with a lot of nazakat. So they are more than willing to play the stereotypical roles of belle, woman in love, woman who's devoted, mother, wife, mother, etc. And so graduate ultimately to the white matriarch, the kind of mother you see in The Sound and the Fury. But unfortunately, the next picture fills us with disappointment and, with a lot of sorrow. Look at the state of the Southern women of the 1930s. Look at their clothes, cheap, sagging, ill-fitting clothes. Their figures, they've lost their figures. And if you make it out that, they have to engage in hard labor, they can no longer use servants. And they have had to cut off their hair, not out of a sense of fashion, but because there is no other way out. So definitely they have come down in life a lot. So tremendous disappointment, heartache, heartburn. Next picture, even more saddening. The white trash of Mississippi. Faulkner hailed from Mississippi, the Lafayette County of Mississippi, which he recreated as Yoknapataufa in his novels. So look at these people, starvation level. They have barely cloth enough to hide their nakedness. So terrible situation. Now, why did this come about? Of course, definitely their defeat in the hands of the North, their humiliation. So all this within a short period of time. And defeat leads to a kind of knee-jerk reaction. So a resurgence of Ku Klux Klan and the history of racial hatred in the South. Now, a clarification here, Ku Klux Klan is not only against the blacks, it is against all kinds of progress. It is against industrialization, it is against scientific thought, it is against technological development, Jews, Japanese, Chinese, Asians. It only believes in traditional white supremacy, nothing else. So the activities of Ku Klux Klan and their very strong belief in segregation and not only segregation, but also you see in torturing, killing, constantly bullying the blacks, and the kind of violence that resulted in. That is also a reality of this period. And this very disturbing picture of the black boy who has been lynched, think of Dry September, where this young boy was first beaten up and then hung from a tree. So that was the common form of lynching. Look to your right, you will find 2 or 3 men smiling. So they are white trash, and they're very pleased with this public hanging of the boy. So lynching had become the culture of the South. Segregation of blacks and whites. So whites to your right, all the white girls sitting, and the black girls sitting to the left. This ended in the South in 1964. And segregation actually meant denying basic facilities, educational facilities, other facilities to the blacks. So all of this got the black fed up. And they started they seriously migrated to the north in hordes. So this picture actually, I believe to be the pivot, the kind of, the connection between the two parts of my lecture. The great migration of the 1920s, look at the blacks with their suitcases packed. Of course, the southern whites did whatever there was, they could do within their means to stop the blacks, but you can't really stop Niagara Falls with a tennis racket. So you have to, so what has to happen. So not only all those problems, lynching, segregation, Ku Klux Klan, not only all of that urged the blacks to move to the north, but also the fact that they were grateful to the north for giving them freedom, for abolishing slavery, and they wanted to participate in the progress and success of the north. So that was also part of their decision. Also, you see activities of Ku Klux Klan. Bessie Smith, she gets flogged. She gets horse flogged in Dallas. So when she ultimately goes to the north, she never returned to Texas again in her life. So all these shameful incidents. Now, with the disappearance of the blacks, the landscape actually empties out. Now, the third part of my presentation, certain films and novels dealing with interracial rape and molestation, since Dry September is about interracial rape, molestation. Let us look into the matter. The first text is Dry September. Look at this poster or book cover, whatever it is. So there is that barber's shop in the bottom, and you have the white trash accumulating there and sitting and gossiping all the way about. And then they are all rushing out to seek revenge on this rumor that Miss Minnie Cooper has spread. So it is a rumor. There's a certain degree of ambiguity. There's a certain fuzziness. Now, my father says something. He says that you cannot explain something that you have not understood yourself. So in order to be able to explain something, you have to understand that well. So if you look at these books which deal with interracial rape, you will find majorly the book hinges on rumors and ambiguities. The next text. A film we have all watched, a book which most of us have read, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, the Pulitzer-winning book, where Atticus Finch, played by Gregory Peck, defends his rape-accused black client. Again, the rape charge turns out to be false because this white trash woman, she has spread a rumor about the black servant. This is a Rhodesian book, but I've thought that it was very relevant to my paper. The Grass is Singing by Nobel Prize winning novelist Doris Lessing, where this white woman has an extremely troubled, ambiguous, confusing, psychosexual relation with her black servant Moses. So we are never really sure. If you read the book, you will never really be sure as to what is happening between this woman and Moses. Finally, she's murdered by Moses. Why Moses is murdering her is another question. So the book springs more questions than it answers. A book close to our heart is about India, and we have our beloved Vikram Banerjee acting the role of Dr. Aziz in the film version. So Dr. Aziz, who is a brown man, but who is an educated man, all he wanted to do, remember, he was an Anglophile. He loved these English men and women with whom he had a very friendly relation. So all he ever wanted to do was give a treat to his white English guests, and the huge ruckus that issued from it until the end of the book. We never really know what exactly happened in Malabar Hills. So again, tremendous fuzziness, tremendous ambiguity, and this keeps recurring till we are forced to ask ourselves the question, this cannot be some kind of structural fault. Rather, this is a kind of symbolic cipher. That is, majorly, there has been a collapse, there has been a breakdown in the relationship between the black and white, or the brown and the white, which is why there can only be misunderstandings. There can only be enmity and violence. So this kind of relationship is not a healthy relationship anymore. And this TV series, is a series that we watched when we were students. And it is about, again, a very educated Indian student, Hari, who falls in love with a white woman, and then very strangely and tragically, he's arrested for raping her, and he's arrested by this white police officer who is a closet homosexual and who is secretly attracted to Hari. Now, I included this picture because I wanted to, alert my viewers to the structure of the photo. That is, the black and the white, they're almost like two halves of a suppurating whole, something that is rotting inside. And the colonizer, the white man, the settler, he's nothing without the colonized. They need each other. There is some kind of a sadomasochistic relationship between the two that is just the opposite of the symbiotic, which is bringing out the worst in each. So this negativity, it sort of issues forth. You get all kinds of negative vibes from the picture. So the negative, the debilitating aspects of the cancerous aspects of colonization, or in the case of Faulkner, racism. Absalom, which I personally think is more representative of Faulkner's of oeuvre than Sound and the Fury. Absalom is an extremely tragic and, sorry to say, like an unreadable novel, which without a teacher's interpretation is almost impossible to understand. Now, it is a story of Thomas Sackpen, a white aristocrat in the South, whose only dream is to have a white heir. But he keeps on rejecting his heirs, either because of their gender, that is, if they are women, or on the suspicion that they may be of mixed race. So maybe it is a case of miscegenation. So whether it is gender or it is miscegenation, ultimately all these binaries, this inability to come out of dialectics, inability to come out of binaries, finally, wreaks havoc with Satpin's, dynasty. It finishes off his dynasty. His house gets burnt down, and the only survivor is an autistic black grandson. So Absalom is King David's illegitimate son, the best among his sons, whom he loves very deeply, but to whom he cannot bequeath his throne because of man-made rules and ultimately defunct rules. I'm also reminded of King Henry VIII's plight. He kept on marrying, he kept on killing his wives, he made a mess of his life. For what? For a male heir. He did get a male heir, he did have a son, but that son was illegitimate, and he grew up in the palace precincts, and he was healthy, and he lived for a long time. He could have been the king. So you see the futility of it all, the futility of thinking in terms of segregation, in terms of racism, in terms of dialectic. So this is repeatedly communicated by Faulkner. Finally, this very interesting poster, Hollywood poster of The Sound and the Fury, in which Yul Brynner is playing the role of Jason, and the woman here is Miss Quentin, his niece. So the poster indicates some kind of an incestuous attraction that Jason has for this girl here. Now, my point is that when I read the novel, I did not really get this kind of a feeling. What we thought was that Quentin, the brother, was attracted to Caddy, the sister. So again, there was incest there, which actually causes Quentin to flee the nest. And Caddy ultimately walks out of the entire horrible scene and becomes the mistress of some Nazi general or something. So she just refuses to be part of this binary, the man-woman binary, the patriarch-belle binary. Miss Quentin is chafing under the pressure. But again, you see, Sound and the Fury brings out the fact that, the South is incapable of thinking in terms other than binaries. And if you're thinking in terms of the token blacks, whether it is Dilsey, the black servant of The Sound and the Fury, or Mammy of Gone with the Wind, even though these novels are very, very different, they're radically different from each other, but these two servants could be twins because they are very stereotypical figures. They're Lady Uncle Toms. Female Uncle Toms. That is, they are completely, committed caregivers. So again, you will find that a writer as talented, as gifted as William Faulkner is unable to get under the skin of the blacks. He is only talking of whites. So essentially, the Southern Renaissance is the Renaissance of emptiness. It is the critiquing of the moral depredation, the moral and emotional bankruptcy of Southern America, of Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, all these states which are completely finished, which have been ruined by the exodus of the blacks, by segregation. So ultimately, it is a white man gazing at an empty landscape. So with this, I come to the end of my presentation, but before calling it a night, I would like to ask you to gaze at these two pictures once again. Now, in the beginning, I said that they were very different from each other, but now when we have, discussed the two of them, are they really so different? Because both are ambitious, both are deeply disappointed, both are idealists, both are finally disenchanted. One breaks free from history, the other is burdened by history that actually saps his energy, which gives him nothing. So underneath their differences, I do believe that their courage to confront the moment of truth is what unifies them and makes them the greatest among the American greats. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arpa Madam, for such an edifying lecture, and thank you so much for enriching us so much with your presentation. Now I would request Shumana Madam to conduct the interactive session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ipshita. Thank you, Arpadi, for for your deliberation. Now there is, because of constraint of time, I shall be taking one question each for each speakers. And there is one question to Tania, Dr. Tania Chakraborty by Indrani Ray, who says that Hemingway, having received shared parentage, are his works trying to overcome the confusion of gender boundaries or celebrating them? Tania, would you like to answer?
Yes, sure. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Very interesting question, Indrani. I'm calling her Indrani because she's been my student and also my colleague for a while. Right. Having received shared parentage, is he trying to overcome the confusion of gender? As I tried to show in my presentation, Indrani, Hemingway was a man who was there was a contrary pull within him. So if you think of the multiple marriages, if you think of the way he was attracted to women, obviously he was celebrating, the blurring of gender boundaries. He had 4 wives and he had quite a few, women friends. And he definitely celebrated the gender blurring. But at the same time, there were certain prejudices he could not overcome. Because, coming after Professor Arpa Ghosh's talk, I would like to talk a little about the Garden of Eden, where we have the character called Catherine Bourne. Catherine Bourne is shown as a character who is a budding writer. So Catherine tries to compete with David, the writer who's also the protagonist. But you see where Hemingway was posited, the best that he could offer was madness. So there were shades of Zelda in Catherine Bourne. So though he was celebrating the gender blurring, though he was celebrating, role playings in different role playings also in bed, and though he enjoyed the camaraderie and though he loved their bravado and fearlessness, something in him held him back to, appreciate the women who would be tough fighters and who would actually compete with men. So I would say he was a bundle of contradictions, in spite of, dually gendered parents.
Thank you, Tania. Thank you very much. Now, the next question is directed to Dr. Arpa Ghosh. Am I audible? I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now, how do the novels in South and North differ in terms of representation and style in the 20s and 30s? It is by Dr. Nilanjan Chakraborty. Arpadi?
Actually, you see, I can understand Nilanjan's confusion because I began in the 20s and ended in the 30s. This is because of a very, very technical reason, which is that the texts included in the UP syllabus both belong to 1936 or 35. So the Clarence essay by Scott Fitzgerald was written were written during that time when he was suffering from a breakdown. He had packed up, so as to say, and I always felt that this was very unfortunate that our UG students should be introduced to Scott Fitzgerald with something so negative and something so troubled when we were introduced to him by means of Clarence. So 1920s is the time of his ascent and 1930s is the time of his descent. Whereas compared to Scott Fitzgerald, William Faulkner's Lowell in his Cycle and his major work is solidly placed in the 1930s. But definitely there is a huge difference. My entire talk was devoted towards, towards bringing up that difference. The North was the place of prosperity, excitement. It was a kind of upbeat situation there because of majorly not only money coming in, but also labor, talent and labor. Think of the Harlem Renaissance, which is another movement, which is also taking place in the 1920s, and its representative, delineator is Langston Hughes. So the migration of the blacks, I believe, is the case in point. That is what changes the game for the North and South. So the Southern Renaissance is essentially a treatise of white bankruptcy in every sense of the term. Northern literature is at first a celebration of the upbeat mood and later a criticism of that same austerity and that same, total surrender to mammon, total surrender to consumerism, something that we are witnessing in Kolkata at the moment. So, not in the pandemic times, but, overall, they complete, all out madness for consumption, for just burning money. So I find a lot of similarities between pre-COVID Kolkata and the 1920s New York. So I hope I have at least addressed your question.
Thank you, Arpa, very much. So we have come to almost to the end of the webinar, and I will move on to the next session, which is the valedictory session. And I will request Ms. Shonchari Bosha from our department to deliver the valedictory address. Over to you, Shonchari.
Thank you, madam. We come to the last session, which is the valedictory address, and I am privileged to have the opportunity of thanking the honorable speakers and advisors of this very engaging webinar. Offer my sincerest gratitude to our principal, Dr. Vidisha Kolkotida, who has been a source of constant support and inspiration, encouraging us to engage in academic activities in these difficult times. I offer my gratitude to our IQAC coordinator, Professor Mahua Basu, for her guidance in steering the college to set new benchmarks in quality assurance. I sincerely thank the coordinator of the webinar subcommittee, Professor Rima Panjilal, for her overwhelming help and support in organizing this webinar. I now thank the very erudite and versatile speakers, Dr. Tania Chakravertty and Dr. Arpa Ghosh, for two wonderful sessions of provoking and stimulating speeches that have enriched us. I thank the department, IQAC, and the E-team of our college who are behind the success of every webinar. Without their continuous support, it would not have been possible to smoothly conduct the webinar. Last but not the least, it is you, the participants, who have been so intent and patiently listening that I offer my gratitude. Thank you all for making it a success.
Someone unmute yourself.
I now invite Komalika Bhattacharya from our department, from the Department of English, to formally end the webinar. Okay, over to you, Komalika.
Thank you, madam. Before we leave, I would like you to follow the link in
Komalika can't be heard, so I'm muting her and just reminding you to fill all the participants to get your e-certificate. Don't fill the feedback form, you will not be able to certificates because they are auto-generated. And thank you very much. Thank you, Audrey, for being so kind to present.
Pleasure to share the podium with Tania and yourself, Shumana. Like a reunion,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yes, right. Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right.
So have a very good night. And it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to hear you both. See you both and hear you both.
Thank you. The pleasure was mutual.
Thank you.